let's talk about some movies that I think are overrated. For the record, I don't think any of these are bad movies. I just think that they are slightly overrated or some severely overrated. It's just my opinion. There's no right or wrong when it comes to opinions about movies, so just keep an open mind. And also, it would be boring if everyone just had the same opinion. Let's start with a bonus movie, like an honorable mention. This one is Casino Royale, which I don't really think fits on this list because I don't think it's as overrated as any of these 5 movies that I'm going to talk about later. But I still want to put it here because I want to talk about how I don't think that Casino Royale is one of the best James Bond movies out there. But a lot of people seem to think so. A lot of people think that it's one of the best James Bond movies. Personally, I think it's a good movie, but I don't think it's a good James Bond movie because in addition to being a good movie, Casino Royale also has to satisfy all the James Bond stuff, you know, the exotic locations, the fast cars, and that personality. I don't think that this movie ticks any of those boxes. So if you're a James Bond fan who has seen a lot of James Bond movies before watching Casino Royale, you might be really surprised by how the movie is and how the movie was directed and the whole story and the whole tone. This movie has a very serious and dark tone. And some James Bond movies are darker than others. I don't really mind that. But what really bugs me about this movie is how disrespectful it comes across, or at least to me, to the whole legacy that's built by Sean Connery and Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, all those people who played Bond. It feels like this movie is just really disregarding their legacy by having a few scenes where James Bond's personality makes really drastic changes. Like for example, a bartender asks James Bond how he wants his martini, and you all know what the answer James Bond is going to give, right? But James Bond in Casino Royale says, "I don't care." That might seem cool to some people, but I think for somebody who has seen a lot of James Bond movies, it just seems really disrespectful to me, as this is a signature line from James Bond and now they're just ruining it by saying "I don't care." I know some people may think like this is really just a small minor scene, but this minor scene has big implications. It implies that this movie is really pretty much ignoring the roots of James Bond. I think Skyfall is a great example of ushering a new generation for James Bond without completely disregarding the legacy of James Bond. Number 5, Soul. This movie got so much attention when it came out. It's considered to be one of Pixar's best, and people put it on the best of the year list. I don't think it deserves to be on those spots at all. Of course, I think it's a good movie, and I think Pixar is an animation company with very high standards, and this movie definitely hits those standards. But is it one of Pixar's best? I really don't think so. Pixar has a certain formula. They like to put faces on inanimate objects. They like to put faces on everything, basically from emotions to cars, animals, and it seems like now they're putting faces on souls. It's just the usual Pixar stuff. They like to do that. And this movie wasn't as deep or philosophical as I hoped it would be. At this point, they're making a story about a jazz musician. Let's face it, kids are not going to be interested in a story like this. So why not they just go a little bit further with the themes and the ideas that this movie is revolving around. It seems like there's still one small part of Pixar that still tries to pander to kids. And it wasn't really as thought-provoking as I thought it would be for a movie about these themes, about the meaning of life. It should make me think, but it just didn't. And I didn't think about anything after I watched this movie. Also, I feel it's really disjointed in many places. This movie is like a video game. It's like RPG where you finish one quest, you move on to another quest, you move on to another quest. But the thing is, a movie like this, it should have been a cohesive story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it should be like one long journey. It just seems like this movie feels very disjointed. It feels like many little pieces rather than one big whole. Number 4 is Begin Again. This movie was directed by John Carney, who did one of my favorite musicals called Once. If you haven't seen that movie yet, you should go watch it. Begin Again is so cliche and it's everything that Once isn't. Once is a very groundbreaking and very refreshing take on a story about musicians, and Begin Again is just the most overused and cliched and trite unoriginal story out there about musicians. It's about this down on his luck manager who is really struggling with his career. Suddenly he finds this musician who's really talented, and he takes this musician under his wing to groom her into a very successful musician. Basically, it's the whole A Star Is Born story. Again, how many times are they gonna tell this story? But what comes across as really disappointing to me is that this movie was directed by John Carney, exactly the guy who made a movie that's completely different just previously, and now he's moved on to this. And number 3 is Edge of Tomorrow, starring Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt. This movie is one of those time loop movies when a certain period of time loops again and again and again. This idea has been explored so many times in science fiction. It is definitely an idea that is not new in any way, and I don't think that with Edge of Tomorrow they did anything new with that concept. It's the same Groundhog Day concept again. Somebody just did it again, and it's nothing special. But it seems like people really like this movie. They think it's one of the best action movies of the generation. I don't know why. It's just a time loop movie. Sure, there are some cool action sequences in it. I think it's an entertaining popcorn movie, but it doesn't really do anything new with this time loop concept, and it's generally very predictable. At number 2 is Forbidden Planet. This movie seems to be an image that represents an era of science fiction. That era of science fiction, or to be more specific, the 1950s era, is famous for just being simple, and the simplicity is part of the appeal. And I don't know how this movie has grown to become the image of 1950s science fiction, because this movie is nothing like what I just described. It's not visually groundbreaking. I don't think that its visuals are really all that impressive even for that time. I don't really think it has that simplicity that a lot of these 1950s science fiction movies have, and I don't think it has that charm, that very specific 1950s charm, and it doesn't really have that sense of humor too. So this movie basically is an image of 1950s science fiction without having anything good about 1950s science fiction. The main problem with this movie is it's trying to be really technical. It's trying to be very serious about the scientific topics that it's discussing. But the problem is, at that time, maybe they just did not have those sufficient scientific discoveries in order to create stories that would feel advanced and real. The end result is this movie that spends a lot of time talking about science, but it just ends up being boring. None of the scientific discussions in this movie ever result in anything other than boredom, and I just hope for more action scenes or special effects whenever I watch this movie, because I just don't think maybe at that time they just aren't advanced enough to film something that is more technically based. Okay, we've come to number 1, the most overrated movie in my opinion. Now, I don't think that this is the worst movie on this list. The reason it's at number 1 is because my feelings and the general public consensus are just so different for this movie. This movie is considered one of America's best movies ever made. Singing in the Rain. People love this movie. It's often on greatest movies of all time list, and it's always really high up there. And I don't really understand why. Because for musicals of that era, I think that most of what Fred Astaire did was better than this. Maybe why this movie is so highly regarded is because it has historical value, because it deals with an important time in film history when silent films are kind of going downhill because of the rise of talkies. Maybe it's because of that. But Sunset Boulevard is also about that. And I think that Sunset Boulevard is a movie that explores that part of film history much better than Singing in the Rain. Singing in the Rain did it pretty much in the most surface level way. It isn't really a deep or insightful examination in any way. So those are movies that I feel are really overrated. It's just my opinion, and if someone out there has some of the same opinions that I have in this video, then good for you. You are not alone.